Hello everyone, I'm Dawn. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for visiting with me today. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, The Cutting Board. We do all kinds of things here. We do true crime, we do food content, Disney content, hauls, vlogs, reviews, DIY, SFX makeup. I have a lot of interest and I want to share them with you. So, before we get started, I do have to issue a trigger warning. I just feel it's necessary. There is a little cruelty to animals in this, just a little bit, but too much in my opinion. Assaults, talk of hurting oneself, harm to children. So this may be difficult for some viewers, and I will not be offended if you choose not to watch this video. I'll catch you in the next one. So in this video, we are going to talk about Aileen Wournos. When we research serial killers or learn about serial killers and violent offenders, we often find that many of them were severely mistreated as children. But they still deserve the punishment they receive, or I should say the sentence. There are a few people that argue, well, they had terrible childhoods. A bad childhood is not an excuse for a bad act in adulthood. You know what I'm saying? Someone's problems or mental illness could be the result of somebody else's behavior towards them, what they did to them. But once you reach a certain point in life, you are responsible for your mental health. It may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. That may seem unfair, but it is also unfair to victims to say, well, yes, you're a victim. This happened to you or your family member, but the perpetrator was severely mistreated as a child, so it's okay. I don't think any of us, or at least very few of us, would agree with that. But with Aileen Wournos, there is some division on those thoughts. There are those that think she should have been spared the death penalty because of what she went through as a young girl. And I agree with that too. But most of her victims, or supposedly, were violent, particularly against women, according to her. I'm going to try to keep my personal feelings out of this as Jesus. Sorry about that. Sorry I used the Lord's name in vain. The cats are going crazy. I'm not starting this video over again. I've been starting it over all morning. They're driving me nuts, but they're sweet. Okay, they're active little critters. So I'm going to try to keep my personal feelings out of this, but I probably won't. I do want you to know that not only was Aileen Wournos severely mistreated, because I can't say the A word on YouTube. Sorry about that. I know it's a lot worse than just mistreated, but Aileen was severely mistreated by men as a child, but also her entire life. Almost every single male that ever came into her life mistreated her. She spent her entire life being a rag doll for men. And part of me doesn't blame her for breaking, but another part of me is like, you committed a violent crime, so you do have to pay for that. But I don't think anyone thinks that she should have just gotten away with unaliving these men. But I do think a lot of people agree that maybe the death penalty was unfair, and maybe she didn't get a fair trial because her defense team was useless. But given her situation, I think the death penalty was unfair. But we're just going to talk about her story in this video, and you can all form your own opinions, or let me know in the comments your thoughts, and anything I left out that you feel I should have mentioned. I tried to be very thorough, but I'm not a professional. I miss things. But anything at all, as long as you're polite. But let's talk about this. So Aileen Wournos was born Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29th, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. She was a leap year baby. Her mother's name was Diane Kathleen Wournos, who was just 14 years old when she married 18-year-old Leo Arthur Pittman. Wournos is Aileen's mother's maiden name. They were married on June 3rd, 1954. Aileen has an older brother named Keith, who was born March 14th, 1955. Diane and Leo were married less than 2 years, and Diane was pregnant with Aileen when she filed for divorce. Aileen's mom was 16 years old when she gave birth to her. And Aileen never met her father, who he had several run-ins with the law. On June 8th, 1962, he was charged with taking indecent liberties with an 11-year-old girl in Rochester. He was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree kidnapping and R-wording. Sorry, YouTube doesn't like that word either. For R-wording a 7-year-old girl on November 23rd, 1962. In other documentation, it was said that the girl was 17 years old, but after thorough research, I have concluded the girl was 7 years old. Because there was varying information. He was arrested in a motel in Wichita, Kansas on November 25th, 1962, and he was held at the Sedgwick County Jail. He was suspected of committing the same crimes on a 9-year-old little girl in Troy, Michigan. But I couldn't find any information about that beyond that little bit I just told you. So I don't know if he was ever charged with or convicted of that. On April 3rd, 1963, he was examined by the Sanity Commission and committed to a state hospital because he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. But less than 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after being committed, he escaped the state hospital with 2 other criminally insane inmates. And he was arrested again on August 23rd in Casnovia, Michigan, and shortly after that, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But he eventually was tried for his crime against the 7-year-old little girl when he received his life sentence, of course. He was found hanging in his cell at Kansas State Penitentiary on January 30th, 1969, at 32 years old. Diane abandoned her children, Aileen and Keith, in January 1960 when Aileen was almost 4 years old. She left the children with their maternal grandparents, Laurie and Britta Wournos, who legally adopted Keith and Aileen on March 18th, 1960. They lived in Troy, Michigan. Both Laurie and Britta were major alcoholics. They lived with 2 other adopted siblings, Barry and Lori, who were actually Keith and Aileen's biological aunt and uncle. Difficult family situation. When playing with matches and lighter fluid with her brother Keith, Aileen, at the time she was 6 years old, she was burnt very badly and had scars on her face for the rest of her life. That's just a testament of how unsupervised she was. When Aileen was around 10 years old, she found out that the people who adopted her were not her parents, but her biological grandparents. She always thought they were her parents, and which was difficult for her, and it just added more stress and more tension to an already miserable, volatile living arrangement. Her grandfather had an explosive temper, and this, trigger warning, even forced Aileen to watch him drown a kitten. I'm sorry, I just want to express how horrible he is. Aileen said that her grandfather beat and R-worded her repeatedly as a child the whole time she lived with him. And by the time Aileen was 11 years old, she was engaging in sexual activities in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, and food. She was doing that for food. So my line of thinking is she did this because it was what she was taught to do to get her needs met. Her needs weren't getting met, not even food. Not that drugs and cigarettes are needs per se, but they may have been to her. And, food is definitely a need. So maybe her grandfather, as well as other males that entered the home, withheld food for sexual favors, so she learned that. I'm just spitballing. But that behavior is a result of severe mistreatment. So, no surprise there. Boys gave her the nickname Cigarette Pig. That's nice. Aileen also had an incestuous relationship with her brother Keith, which she says was R-word. Aileen's adoptive brother, biological Uncle Barry, also R-worded Aileen regularly. Lori, Aileen's adoptive sister and actual biological aunt, also severely mistreated Aileen. There were several witnesses to Aileen's mistreatment that her defense attorney failed to call for whatever reason that would have been. I don't know. But they were willing to testify on Aileen's behalf to all of the mistreatment, including all the bruises and marks that they witnessed. They would have also testified that Aileen's grandfather sent her to a known PDF's home where she would be R-worded multiple times. One of the neighbor children, now of course an adult, said that at a party, Aileen stated that she wished her brothers, so Keith and the other guy, Keith and Barry, would stop coming in her room at night. Lori, Aileen's sister aunt, threw a glass of water at her and kicked her out of the house for making that statement. Another person, Dawn Botkins, who could have been a potential witness in Aileen's trial in her defense, said Aileen was tied down to a bed and repeatedly R-worded by a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club when she was 15 or 16 years old. Incidentally, there's a book called Dear Dawn that is There's a book called Dear Dawn that is basically letters from Aileen to Dawn. Also, Aileen ran away several times and was sent to juvenile detention for that. At 14 years old, after being R-worded by a family friend, Aileen became pregnant. Toni Nazar, a woman who was a neighbor child of the Wournos family, said that a local PDF nicknamed Potluck was supposedly the one who got Aileen pregnant. Aileen was sent to a home for unwed mothers where she gave birth to a boy on March 23rd, 1971. The child was placed for adoption. A few months after the child's birth, Aileen dropped out of school. She bounced around after this from, living in the woods, juvenile detention, and the Wournos home. Her grandmother, Britta, died from cirrhosis of the liver on July 7th, 1971. And after that, her grandfather, Laurie, wanted nothing more to do with Aileen or Keith. So he kicked them both out. Aileen supported herself through prostitution, and she lived mostly in abandoned cars in the woods. On May 27th, 1974, at 18, Aileen was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado for DUI, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. Later, she was charged with failure to appear. In 1976, she hitchhiked to Florida. Shortly after finding her way to Florida, I'm getting ready to get you. Shortly after finding her way to Florida, she met a wealthy lawyer, businessman, and yacht club president, Louis Gratz Fell. And he was around 50 years older than Aileen. In my research, I found his birth date was June 29th, 1907, and that he was admitted to the bar in 1923, which means he would have been 16 at the time. So either he was super duper smart, law education was different in the early 1920s, or that's misinformation. But I wasn't able to find any other information about that. Aileen and Louis married the same year they met, and the announcement was in the society pages of the local newspapers. But Aileen could not control her volatile behavior. She'd always had a temper. She had several confrontations at a local bar and got arrested for assault. She also hit her husband, Louis, with his cane. He got a restraining order against Aileen. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the cats, not this. Their marriage lasted around 9 weeks. She returned to Michigan and ended up getting arrested again on July 15th, 1976, charged with assault and disturbing the peace for throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. A few days after that arrest, her brother Keith passed away at just around 21 years old from esophageal cancer. She inherited $10,000 from his life insurance policy, which she spent on a ticket for drunk driving and a new car that she ended up wrecking soon after purchasing. At 22 years old, she attempted to remove herself from living by shooting herself in the stomach. And this would be the 6th time since she was 14 years old that she tried to unalive herself. And that's such a cry for help. It's such a cry for help. 6 times since she was 14. This woman had no one, never. On May 20th, 1981, in Edgewater, Florida. Did I say 1921? I meant 1981. If I said 1921, I'm sorry. She was arrested again, this time for armed robbery of a convenience store where she went in wearing just a bikini, allegedly. She stole $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She was sentenced on May 4th, 1982, and was released from prison on June 30th, 1983. On May 1st, 1984, she was arrested for trying to pass a forged check in Key West. On November 30th, 1985, she was a suspect in the theft of a revolver and ammunition in Pasco County. That's also in Florida. It's important to mention Aileen had several fake names that she used when she would be arrested, for other crimes. From forged checks, resisting arrest, theft, assault, drunk driving, drunken disorderly. Some of her fake names or aliases were Sandra Kretsch, Susan Blahovich, Cammie Marsh Green, Lee Blahovich, and several others. And it seems like her whole life was just a crime spree. Her entire life was a crime spree. And I know it's hard to feel sorry for someone like that, but when you know all the details, it just starts making more sense, I guess. Although killing, when she gets to that never makes sense to me, unless it's truly self-defense. On January 4th, 1986, she was arrested in Miami for car theft, resisting, and obstruction. Also in 1986, Aileen, going by the name Lee, met 24-year-old Tyria Moore at a bar in Daytona Beach called Zodiac. Tyria was a hotel maid, and they were together for 4.5 years, and Aileen continued earning money while she was with her as a prostitute. Aileen was very jealous and didn't like for Tyria to speak to anybody at all. They lived together pretty much like vagabonds, moving from place to place, hotels, trailer parks, what have you. Tyria ended the relationship in 1990 after Aileen got arrested for a crime unrelated to the killings. So we're going to rewind just a few months, just a little bit, to 1989. On December 1st, 1989, Tyria and Aileen were living in a Volusia County motel. Aileen was drunk and told Tyria that she killed a man early that morning. She said that she sorted through the man's things, through his belongings, keeping some, discarding others. And she said that she abandoned the man's car near Ormond Beach and then left his body in a wooded area. Several months later, Tyria began seeing media reports that law officers, I'm sorry, it's the cats, it's not, I'm sorry to giggle. They were looking for 2 women suspected of being involved in a series of killings. Tyria got scared, and that's when she ended it with Aileen, and she returned to her home up north in Pennsylvania. But Florida law enforcement officers located her, and she returned to Florida to try to clear herself and testify. She would eventually testify against Aileen. She was set up to get a confession from Aileen, which she did get the confession. Aileen killed 7 men total that she admitted to. Richard Charles Mallory's body was found on December 13th, 1989. However, he was killed on November 30th, 1989, and his car was found 2 days after his killing. Aileen claims that he R-worded her and S-worded her, if you know what that is, cleaned himself with alcohol and then poured alcohol on her private region to clean her also with her torn injuries and stuff. But she had given inconsistent statements to the police about this. And I'm not saying I do or don't believe the claims that he assaulted her, but he had been convicted of attempted R-word in Maryland. He did time for that. And Aileen didn't know that when she first told the police he R-worded her. Again, not saying I believe it or not, I believe it. It just, to me, seems incredibly plausible. We will never know what really happened. We're going to believe what we believe. But if he did assault her as viciously as she describes to the police, it could have triggered. It could have triggered her so badly after a lifetime of being mistreated by every male she's ever known, except for Lewis. This could have been the trigger. This could have been the thing that set her off, that brought all those dormant feelings up, that made her feel they all need to be dead, meaning men. I'm not saying what she did is okay. Absolutely not. She could have just wounded him and gotten away. But I do not believe that she deserved the death penalty. I just don't believe that. Life in prison, yes. Death penalty, no. I read the appeal documents, and I believe if the defense properly did their job, which they clearly did not, she would have gotten a life sentence. So let me tell you about her other victims. David Andrew Spears' body was found on June 1st, 1990, in a remote area in southwest Citrus County. Except for a baseball cap, he was completely nude. He died of 6 bullet wounds to the torso. Charles Edmund Carskadden's body was found on June 6, 1990, in Pasco County. The medical examiner found 9 small caliber bullets in his lower chest and upper abdomen. Peter Abraham Seams, in June 1990, he left Jupiter, Florida, heading for New Jersey. Law enforcement later found his car in Orange Springs on July 4th, 1990. Witness Rhonda Bailey identified Tyria Moore and Aileen Wournos as the 2 people who were seen leaving the car where it was ultimately found. A palm print on the interior door handle matched Aileen's. And his body has never been found. Troy Eugene Burris' body was found on August 4th, 1990, in a wooded area along State Road 19 in Marion County. The body was substantially decomposed, but evidence showed that he had been shot twice. Charles Richard Humphreys, found on September 12, 1990 by officers in Marion County. The body was fully clothed and had been shot 6 times in the head and torso. His car was found in Suwannee County. Walter Gino Antonio. His body was found on November 19th, 1990, near a remote logging road in Dixie County. His body was nearly nude and had been shot 4 times in the back and head. Law enforcement found his car 5 days later in Brevard County. Aileen was arrested on January 9th, 1991 at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County on an outstanding warrant in the name Lori Grody, which is actually the name of her adopted sister/aunt. After the police found Tyria and brought her back to Florida, she was able to get Aileen to confess on January 16th, 1991. She claimed she killed them all in self-defense. And they were trying to R-word her. All of them were, according to her. At one point, she said that. I believe that that may be the case with the first one, and I believe it's possible, in her mind anyway, that she believed the other men were trying to do that as well. I think the first man, Mallory, was the one that sent her over the edge. I do believe that. He was the catalyst, the spark on a pile of kindling that was a lifetime of severe mistreatment just waiting to be lit up. In November 1991, Arlene Prawl, sorry if I mispronounced that, legally adopted Aileen, which seems strange to me. She was an adult at the time. I don't get it. I don't know what that was all about. But in the book, Dear Dawn, Aileen Wournos, in her own words, she says, Arlene is a warm-hearted Christian freak that just loves to help people. And Aileen also said in that book, Arlene is lying through her teeth. So, I don't know. I don't know why this woman adopted her. It's just, I don't know. It's weird to me. I don't know. Explain in the comments if you know what that was about. On January 14th, 1992, Aileen went to trial for the homicide of Richard Charles Mallory. Her adopted brother and sister, aunt and uncle, testified for the prosecution that their home life was ideal, normal, and healthy. But many potential witnesses that were never called said the opposite. But the defense did not call any of them. And for Aileen's first appeal, these witnesses' testimonies weren't allowed. And on January 22nd, 1992, she was convicted with help from Tyria's testimony. At her sentencing, psychiatrist for the defense testified that she was mentally unstable and had a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. I don't think any of us are surprised by that diagnosis, though. 4 days after that testimony, she was sentenced to death. Oh, and the judge did not allow the defense to introduce records showing that Mallory possessed strong sociopathic trends. That was a diagnosis. And the 8 years of treatment that he received in prison for attempted R-word were ultimately ineffective. They weren't allowed to present that. On March 31st, 1992, Aileen pleaded no contest to the homicides of Humphreys, Burris, and Spears. She said in her statement to the court that Richard Mallory did violently R-word her, but the other men did not. But she said they began to start to. But that may have been her perception and fear based on what I believe Mallory did to her. They may have not been planning to do that at all, so we don't know. On May 15th, 1992, she was sentenced to death 3 more times. In June 1992, she pleaded guilty to Carscadden's death, and in November 1992 received her 5th death sentence. In February 1993, she pleaded guilty to Antonio's death and received her 6th death sentence. She didn't receive any charges for Seams because his body was never found, just his car. I have to do further research because she received 6 death sentences. However, a defendant can only be sentenced to death if they are found guilty by a jury. If they plead guilty, they don't have a jury trial, so they can't be found guilty by a jury. Pleading guilty is the only way to avoid the death penalty. Not that any of this matters because, she already got one death sentence in a jury trial, And, they can only kill her once. So I guess it doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things. In 2001, she petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to state her intention to dismiss her attorneys and terminate all pending appeals. She wrote, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I do it again. There's no chance in keeping me alive," and this is her exact quote, "or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." Her attorneys argued that she was not mentally competent, but a court-appointed psychiatrist disagreed with them and stated that Aileen knew what she was saying. Aileen was executed by lethal injection on October 9th, 2002. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day. With Jesus on June 5th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." She was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m., and she was the second woman in Florida to be executed and the 10th in the U.S. since capital punishment in the United States was restored in 1976. Although mental health specialists believe that Aileen's crimes were related to her personality disorders and her psychotraumatic past, while I believe it's true she was severely mentally damaged by her multiple traumas, and I do believe trauma Mallory inflicted on her jump-started her killing spree. She was lost at a very young age, and I don't like to believe there's no hope for someone with that kind of childhood, but there was no one there for her. There was no one in her young life to help her. No, there didn't seem to be anybody. She knew a life of being used, degraded, hurt, demeaned, and exploited. She was abandoned by her mother and pretty much by her father before she was even born. She never knew what a normal relationship was. What happened to Aileen was a series of injustices that can never be equitied. And I am sympathetic to Aileen. I really am. We know so much more now about trauma and CPTSD, and there is help out there, but you have to reach out for it. And this is where responsibility really comes into play. You are not responsible for what other people did to you, but you are responsible for your mental health and how you handle it. Like I always say, like when people say you can't blame your parents for everything that happened to you, I think you can blame them, but it's up to you to fix it. So Aileen's legal team was inadequate. They didn't bring forward any witnesses that could have testified on her behalf, testified to her mistreatment as a child. In fact, her childhood was barely touched on by the defense. And yes, most violent criminals had terrible childhoods, so some didn't. But all I'm saying is I don't believe she should have gotten the death penalty, the death sentence. I just don't believe that. I don't believe she got a fair trial. But that's all for this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I may do a live stream where I go over some of the court documents I have. I might do that soon if there is interest. So I'll talk to everyone later. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.